G'day there, welcome to Victory. My name is Matt Fradd. This channel exists to help people find victory from pornography and the wounds that it inflicts. Today we're going to be talking about how to be gentle with ourselves. So if you're new to the channel or if you haven't yet subscribed, help the channel out by clicking subscribe and that bell button. All right, where to begin? As I was thinking about this video, I thought there's probably going to be people who roll their eyes at all this talk about being gentle with ourselves. We might be tempted to think that all of this language comes from the same people, maybe the same generation of people, who thought that participation trophies were a good idea, and that what we need isn't gentleness with ourselves, but to be more harsh, more strict with ourselves. Well, I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think we ought to be very serious about overcoming a very serious vice such as pornography. I had a conversation that I've probably shared before on this channel with a fella at a big convention, and he came up to me and said, "It's so difficult to be free of pornography." And I sympathized because I understand. But the more we chatted, I wondered if he did have any resolve to actually be free of this. And so I made some suggestions. Well, listen, do you have Covenant Eyes on your computer? He said, well, yeah, but I couldn't afford it, and I couldn't find anyone in my area to be accountable to, and I kept bringing up these suggestions and he kept knocking them down. And eventually I just got fed up with this guy because I got the sense that he wasn't serious about being free from pornography. So I tried a different tactic. I said, okay, well, why don't you go up to your room and just look at porn now? I mean, you have free Wi-Fi up there and you just knock yourself out. And he looked up at me, shocked, as he should have been. And he said, well, I don't want to. And I said, all right, well then let's start making some bloody difficult decisions instead of making excuses about why it's so difficult and complaining about why it's so difficult to be free. So I'm all for tough love. By the way, if he had have said, okay, I'll go up there, I would have pulled him aside and had a different talking to him. It was just a tactic that I was trying out, and it seemed like it worked. But we also ought to be bloody gentle with ourselves, because after a sexual fall, if you do fall, I'm not assuming that everyone's going to be falling all of the time. What we want to do, of course, is find freedom from this stuff, of course. But, these wounds didn't come overnight, and very likely they're not going to leave overnight either. This gentleness language. Today I want to draw from a 16th century saint. So to anybody who thinks that this is just modern claptrap, you're wrong. This comes from a fella by the name of St. Francis de Sales. And so I'd like to go through this with you because I think it strikes that perfect balance, right, of how to be gentle with ourselves while taking the sin very, very seriously. All right. So let's have a look here. This comes from Introduction to the Devout Life. He says, you must never grow upset about yourself or your imperfections. Is that you? Certainly not me. I fall into the slightest imperfection and I beat myself up and I say negative things inside of my own head to myself, He says, you can be displeased, but never bitter or angry. People become angry because they have been angry. You know what I mean? You get angry, and then you get angry about the fact that you're angry. He says they stay in a chronic state of upset. This adds to the evil and prepares for fresh evils. This anger fosters pride and springs from self-love. About our faults, we must have a quiet displeasure. But a judge is most effective when he gives his verdict calmly. We purify ourselves best by a steadfast repentance, which is proportioned to the weight of our faults, not the strength of our inclinations. So I think what's interesting here is it's usually our sinful passion that leads us to act out and look at pornography or masturbate or act out sexually in some other way. We reach to pornography, we reach to this sexual acting out in order to try to solve something that's going on within us. Maybe an agitation or a frustration or the feeling of being seemingly powerless. So we want a quick fix to that. And porn is the thing we do. very quickly, very passionately. But then we're in another bind because we feel guilty and we feel ashamed, and we act out passionately in a different way by getting angry with ourselves in a bitter way. And this doesn't help. And I like this point about a judge is most effective when he gives his verdict calmly. I'm a parent, and I've certainly fallen into the trap of shouting at my kids, getting frustrated with them, dishing out discipline in a frustrated tone. But any parent will tell you that if the father or the mother is calm and speaks calmly to their child, even as they react emotionally to you, that this is the best and most effective way of bringing about a change in your child. So the same is true with ourselves. He goes on to say that a person can be quite upset by a small fault against purity and consider some gross slander as unimportant. So it's important that we have this holistic view of ourselves as we seek to grow in virtue and eradicate vice. For me, sexual impurity was something I was introduced to at a very young age with masturbation and I'd say pornography around the age of 8 years old. And so when I came into a relationship with Christ at the age of 17, I think this is the thing I was most concerned about because it was the thing that brought me the most shame. And fair enough, we ought to be concerned about this area of our lives. But the different other areas of my lives, like am I lying to my parents, let's say, or being manipulative to them to get what I want? Am I treating my friends in a sort of objectifying way? Am I slandering others? Am I speaking ill of people? Maybe these things didn't even show up on my radar. So that's Francis's point here, is that we can get really upset, with maybe a sexual impurity, but we're completely oblivious to the fact that we're also slandering or we're stealing, or something like that. So that's important to kind of take a holistic view of ourselves. A person might worry about a slight exaggeration and overlook a serious sin against purity. This happens when the person judges according to passion, and that's what we talked about earlier, and not by reason. And here he uses this example, right? A parent's gentle correction has more power than an angry sternness. 100% true. So, think about that for a second though, right? Think of this, a parent's gentle correction, right? What is a parent correcting? Or who is a parent correcting? A parent is correcting a child. Well, you and I have immature parts to us that the Lord wants to grow up. The Lord wants to mature. And so just like we find it much more effective to correct a child gently and calmly, the same thing is going to be true with those childish parts of ourselves. We want to correct those parts of ourselves, not with passion and bitterness and frustration, but with a gentleness. So when you judge your heart guilty, treat it gently. Now listen to this next line, because I think that this is something many of us are guilty of. He says, use pity, not anger. Use pity, not anger, when you're correcting your heart. If you encourage amendment, your repentance will be much deeper. All right, that's really good. All right, so we're going to be talking about different sins here, but we can apply it to sexual impurity or some other sin. He says, suppose I fall into a sin of vanity, which I'm trying to correct. I shouldn't take myself to task and call myself disloyal. I should just say to myself, rise again bravely and fall no more. Walk the road of humility and be more on guard. That's how you should correct yourself. All right, so if you fall into pornography, if you fall into sexually acting out in some way, right, rather than shaming yourself in a passionate, merciless, overly critical sort of way, you should say to yourself, all right, rise again bravely and fall no more. Walk the road of humility and be more on guard. And then St. Francis says, this is the surest way. Also, take some external means and seek advice. If this gentle rebuke doesn't work, use a sterner approach, but always with a loving trust of God. And he quotes from Psalm 42:11 and 15, "Why are you so vexed, my soul? Put your trust in God." And that's a key point here, because you might think to yourself, okay, easier said than done. I need to be gentle with myself, but when I'm in that state of having just fallen so low, I feel such shame and disappointment with myself that I don't know how to be gentle with myself. And the key is going to be trusting a loving Father. It's not the loving Father who is your enemy. The loving Father is your loving Father. The enemy is the enemy. The enemy is the accuser of our brethren, as we read in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10. He's the enemy, right? God is your advocate and your loving Father. So having to put your trust in Him when you've fallen low is what will enable you to look upon yourself with pity as opposed to sternness. Now, I like what he says here too. It's not enough just to be gentle with ourselves. He says you have to take some external means and seek advice. So, fair enough. If you're falling again and again and again, and maybe you're able to be gentle with yourself, that's good. But you're also going to want to take external means and seek advice. All right, so some external means. If you're falling into pornography repeatedly on a laptop or a phone, you need to get bloody serious about some external helps. Covenant Eyes will help with that. CovenantEyes.com, best filtering and accountability on the web. Using that. It might mean getting rid of your smartphone. I've met very courageous folks who'll get what's called a wise phone. You could look those up that have absolutely no access to the internet. Or you may block the App Store so that you can not look at the internet at all. I mean, there's a way to do that, and I'll do another video where I share how to do that. Taking this external means, you've got to do it. You also got to take advice. I created a 21-day course called strive21.com. Every day you'll get about a 5-minute, highly produced video from me. And over the course of 21 days, I walk you through what I think are the necessary steps to find long-lasting freedom from pornography. So you can go to strive21.com right now if you're a fella, because it's for men only. And we've had about 40,000 men go through the course. And it's not an isolated event. You're communing with men from all around the world as you go through this. It's also 100% free. Strive21.com. Strive21.com. All right, listen to this. This is the final piece of advice. He says, when you fall, lift up your heart in quietness. And again, the only way you're going to be able to do that is by trusting in the merciful God who loves you. Do not wonder that you fell. Why would you be so perplexed that weakness is weak? That's you. Just lament your offense and begin anew with a bold, brave heart. All right, so now there's another translation here that I really liked. Let me just find it. Here we go. So listen to this. This kind of sums up all that he's saying. So if you just fall into pornography, if you just fall into masturbation, listen to these words from St. Francis de Sales. Have patience with all things, but chiefly have patience with yourself. Do not lose courage in considering your own imperfections, but instead set about remedying them. Every day begin the task anew. Every day begin the task anew. I think what happens often is we look at our sexual falls in isolation to our history. It's probably not the case that at the age of, let's say you're 25 or 32, out of nowhere, having no sexual sin in your history, you just decided, I know exactly what I'm doing, I know that it's evil, and I don't care. I'm going to look at pornography. Certainly it's possible. But I think for many of us raised in this generation, we have been exposed to pornography from a young age. We've been conditioned to turn to pornography when we feel threatened or scared or impatient or frustrated. And so being more curious about your falls can be more helpful in overcoming them. None of this, if it needs to be said, is meant to be a license to continue falling. We don't want to be these sorts of people. We certainly shouldn't want to be these sorts of people, which is precisely why I'm advising that we be patient with ourselves. If I'm right in thinking that a primary reason people act out sexually, let's say with pornography or masturbation, is that they feel emotionally turbulent, be that frustrated or stressed or what have you, then getting angry at ourselves after a sexual fall is only adding to the emotional turbulence, which will then result in what? In the thing that we've learnt to turn to when we feel emotionally turbulent. That's what I think. I'd love to get your opinion below. Let me know how you have sought to be patient with yourself, whether that's been helpful. Let us know in the comments section about when you have been harsh with yourself. And if, again, what I love about this little community here is it's a small little community here on YouTube, but the comment sections are so encouraging. So feel free to share with each other. Of course, you can share anonymously. God bless you. And finally, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that because it does help us out. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, leave us a review. We really appreciate it. God bless you.